Man, this is an amazing day. I am super excited. Finally, we got someone not only possibly part of the Mars thing, but that's not really it. But we got a perfect title. We got a former astronaut who's not only an astronaut, very one of the 12, I think, and I don't know how many of the living, but actually walked on the moon. And it sounds I'm speechless almost. Charlie Duke's here with us, and then Jim Cantrell, who actually was called up by Elon Musk as thinking it was Ion. But anyway, Ian. But anyway, we'll take it from there. Guys, so great to have you. And Jim, with what you're doing with Phantom Space, really taking space to the next level where it can be. I love what you're doing. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Charlie, you want to introduce yourself? Because I had trouble putting into words just your background and everything. If you want to just do a quick intro about yourself, that would be great. And then you as well, Jim.
I was a graduate of the United States Naval Academy back in 1957. Back then, there was no Air Force Academy, so you could volunteer for the Air Force, and I wanted to fly Air Force, so I went in the Air Force and became a fighter pilot. Then in Germany for 3 years as a fighter pilot, and, back to MIT for a master's. And then in '64, when I got my master's, I was accepted to test pilot school and out in Edwards Air Force Base in California, and graduated the next year. And then in September '65, NASA had a call for astronauts. And I applied and was accepted and started my astronaut career in April of '66. Let's see, I worked on five of the 9 missions that went to the moon. I was a support crew on Apollo 10, Capcom on Apollo 11, backup on Apollo 13 and 17, and flew on Apollo 16. John Young was the 9th man on the moon, and I was the 10th during that flight.
And Jim, could you introduce yourself real quick as well?
Yeah, so my career path was a little different. Started out in mechanical engineering from Utah State University and ended up being employed by the French Space Agency on a joint Soviet mission to Mars, and learned Russian, learned French. When the Soviet Union came apart, I went back to the United States, and we went back in on the part of the U.S. government to do joint missile defense and help stop brain drain post-Soviet Russia. That led Elon Musk to famously call me out of the blue in 2001, wanting Russian rockets. And since I knew those guys and had helped convert some of the Russian missiles that were used to be aimed at us into launching satellites, which I thought was a better use, we did that. And when that didn't work out, we started SpaceX. So I was employee number 4 there. I lasted a while with Elon. Some would say not a long time, but it was long enough for me. And I left there and started my own company, StratSpace, and did a lot of space warfare work, a lot of commercial space work. And since then, I've started 11 companies, and Phantom Space is my most recent. But I've been part of ISI, I've been part of York Space, I've been part of Moon Express, and most recently Phantom.
That's awesome. Well, connect me with both of you, like with Phantom Space. You're both involved. Tell me the intersections here. So, Charlie, tell me what makes you so excited about Phantom Space.
Well, it's just getting started, and it's the first time I've been involved in a new space business, a new space company like this. And when a friend of mine, Michael Gordon, said, would you like to meet Jim? He started this new company. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And so we had a meeting, and I was fascinated with what their concept. And so I said, well, I'd like to go along with it. And so I'm doing what I can to help. And right now it's in the financial side. And then hopefully later on, if they need some professional advice, might try to throw in my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, you're no stranger to space. Jim, tell us, I try to do a little bit of research. It sounds like you're really satisfying a really important niche that hasn't been exploited or commercialized to the degree that you're doing. I'm fascinated with your use of capital. It sounds like you've been really efficient with that as you've begun. Tell us, the audience, more about it. I hope you have much success.
Thank you. Yeah, so Phantom Space, really, we want to be the Henry Ford of space. And by that, we mean to apply mass manufacturing to launch vehicles, the satellites, to bring the cost down, to bring the barriers to getting to space down, and ultimately to making it much more speedy. And so this is the same thing Henry Ford did for the terrestrial transportation, one of the reasons why we all drive cars today. And so that model applies, we think, to the future of space, because in the industry as it exists today, the majority of the satellites are quite small. So there was a little over 3,000 satellites launched last year, and over 95% of them were under 600 kilograms, or something like 1,400 pounds. So we used to launch satellites that were the size of a school bus. Now we're launching satellites the size of a refrigerator. So we're setting up to exploit that part of the market, which really isn't being serviced. SpaceX is doing a great job, but they really made a pivot years ago to something that was, I think, going to colonize Mars and the outer planets, and then service the big missions like humans to space and large satellites. So there's really an underserved area in the small satellite area. So we really have a three-part business plan: launch vehicle, we build the satellites, and then we have our own constellation called Phantom Cloud. So this creates a bit of an ecosystem, in the same way like Apple is an ecosystem, where if you own Apple, you own Apple everything. And we see the launch vehicle as being the foundation of this company that allows us to launch other people's constellations and our own at a pace and a cost that nobody else can. So to your question, or to your point about capital efficiency, we're about a year and a half away from our first launch, and we've only spent about $35 million. Many of my peers have spent $500 million to $1 billion to get there. This is the SpaceX playbook that we're employing, which in the beginning with Falcon 1, we got there for $100 million or so. And this is what you have to do to make an enterprise successful in space. We can't spend billions and billions of dollars, because it's just not out there in private capital, and expect to have a success. So we're very focused on making profit. We're very focused on making this happen. And like our name says, Phantom, it implies that we're quiet, and we're very quiet. So we're more doers than we are talkers about this.
I love that. Are you going to be in Virginia launching? I believe at Wallops Island. Is that a possible launch site? I'm Virginia. That's the interest. I know you're in other places.
Yeah. So we're talking to the authorities there. They approached us about taking over an old NASA scout pad on the island, and so we're in the process of talking to them. We do have 3 launch pads out at Vandenberg on the West Coast, and we have regulatory authority to launch 60 a year out of there. And then we just took over Launch Complex 13 on the Cape, which recently has been used as landing pads for SpaceX. And so we've been given possession of those. We'll be launching from there as well.
Man, I hope to be able to see you guys in real person and live. Charlie, I want to go back to you. You've had some amazing experiences that we need to share about you walking on the moon. Not many people have done that. And then also this wedding ring incident in space. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the walk on the moon was 3 days of exhilaration, if you will, wonder, awe. Just I'm on the moon. You just could hardly believe it, and it was just the beauty of the landing site that we had was just almost overwhelming, and it was very rough and rolling. And so every time we'd go over a ridge, what's on the other side was the attitude John and I had. We had a lot of experiments to do, and it was just a thrill. We just didn't want to come home. We were having so much fun. And so we were the 5th landing on the moon. So I was number 10. There was 12 of us, one more flight after ours was Apollo 17. And you asked a minute ago how many are alive. There was only 4 of us left alive of the 12. And Jack Schmidt and I are in our late 80s, and the other 2 guys are in their 90s, Buzz Aldrin and David Scott. So our ranks are thinning quickly, but that's just, time marches on. One of the unusual events on our flight was what everybody's become to know, the wedding ring story. And during I think it was the second or third day of our flight, there were no showers on Apollo, so you would take off your constant wear garment and thing like that, and just take a wet towel. We did have hot water, and you wet towel and wet it off and just rub down. And when you did that, you usually took off all your clothes and watches and rings and everything like that, and stowed them in a side pocket of the spacecraft. Well, Mattingly had done that, was getting ready to suit up, and everything was there except his wedding ring had floated out of this little pouch. And we looked for several days. We couldn't find it. We knew it's in the spacecraft somewhere, but it was invisible or something. Well, that lasted, let's see, we landed on the moon, and then 3 days later we came back, and now on the, let's see, it would be this 8th day of the mission, we started our journey home. And on the 9th day, I think it was, we were probably 100,000 miles from the Earth, and we had a EVA, and the activity was to, Mattingly would go out and walk hand over hand, walk to the back of the spacecraft to retrieve 2 big film canisters from some mapping cameras that he'd used during the orbits. And so my job was to float out and lock my feet in the hatch and just monitor and hold his lifelines, oxygen and tether and all that stuff. And as I floated out, I looked, and there's the Earth over to the right, about 180,000 miles away, and it was just spectacular. The moon was behind on the other side. So I get back, he gets all this film in, 2 trips, and then I get back inside, and he's now out about 3 meters, 10 feet away, working on a biological experiment or something like that. And his back is to me, so I'm looking at his back, and he's just, and that back's in the shadow, but the rest of us, we're in sunlight. And so I'm watching this, and I look over, and I get this gold glint in my right side, and I look over, and there's his wedding ring slowly floating out the hatch. Well, I grabbed it, and I grabbed at it, but I missed it, and so it floated out. And we're traveling at like 3,000 miles an hour now, but there's no wind drag out there, so everything just goes along together, and it's just relative velocities. And so I watch it, and I don't know how, it took a 30, 40 seconds, maybe a minute to float out there, and it pinged him on the back of the head. On his helmet, he had a round helmet and a round ring. And I said, well, my thought was lost in space, but it took a 180-degree bounce and started back towards the hatch. I don't know, a minute or so later, it floated right back through the middle of the hatch, and I grabbed it and put it on my little flame of my glove, was all it would fit. And so when he gets back inside, I said, I found something for you, Ken.
Wow. That's incredible. Incredible story. Different dynamics, right? And some of your rockets, Jim, I'm kind of changing the subject, but Daytona, and that might have to be with your own interests, right? You're a car driver. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's probably the only thing I've ever known for sure I wanted to do in life was race cars. And I ended up building rockets and satellites to pay for it, I guess.
Because neither of them are cheap habits, right?
Well, they used to say the horse racing was the sports of kings, and I think it's actually auto racing, yeah, because only kings can afford it. So yeah, I've been I started racing go-karts when I was a kid, and I got the bug then, and I always dreamed of racing cars professionally. And so I went to engineering school exactly for that reason, and I got diverted off into space because I saw a poster in the hallway for a NASA sponsored design course. But later in life, I picked up the racing again after got done with France and the Soviet Union and kids and so on. And so I started back into it in about 2005, and I've done both amateur and professional. I'm on the board of the Sports Car Club of America, which is the nation's biggest sanctioning body. It's up there, kind of like NASCAR. And yeah, I've raced endurance races, 24-hour races, short races, vintage races. I have something like 12 race cars. So it's like tools. You need a different one for every tool. And Daytona is my favorite track, which is the name of our launch vehicle, because that's the first time I went over 200 miles an hour on a closed track.
Wow. Wow. That's so what is the parallel to you designing? What do you, is there, what's the overlap or parallel with rockets and cars other than
That's a
the
great
expense?
question. Yeah, so race cars, and I build them too. That's just kind of a hobby I have, and it's the same thing as a rocket. It's very bespoke. You have to make a lot of things yourself. You want to rely because of capital efficiency. Again, sport of kings. You don't necessarily have the king's ransom to pay for it. So you rely on other people's engines. You have to make something that's very reliable. As you can well imagine, if things go wrong at 200 miles an hour, things go wrong and people's lives can end and bad stuff happens. So same thing with rockets. And so there's a strange sort of parallel between the rocket industry and people who like to race cars. Tom Mueller, who was the propulsion guy for SpaceX, he's a huge car guy. He was just in Monaco last weekend, enjoying the race. He races cars himself. He buys a lot of those cars. Chris Thompson, our CTO and co-founder, he's also a racer. My VP of engineering, he's done Pikes Peak, right? So we all have this sort of crazy gene in us, I guess, that we like to chase danger and go fast. And life seems boring otherwise, I suppose, is the only explanation I can come up with for why that is. But we're applying those lessons that we've learned from building race cars from the automotive world to space. We think there's a lot that can be learned there in terms of efficiency of capital, how you build things, how you test for things. And on a race car, some people may think, well, you build it, you just go out and drive it in the race. Wrong. You spend a lot of time testing it, getting it sorted out, and so on. Same with rockets. It's exactly the same thing, except it's orders of magnitude cheaper. So that's where this parallelism comes in.
And then you also have authored Breaking All the Rules. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I imagine that's a lot to do with what you're doing to get rockets to space. Is there not some of that there too?
So the origin of Breaking All the Rules was when I started to realize how significant SpaceX was, because in the early days, we all thought that SpaceX was just another crazy adventure that came along and we jumped on board, and that Elon was another crazy person that had a lot of money that was going to blow it. I used to tell him, how do you become a millionaire in the space business? Start with $1 billion. And
sorry,
he didn't think it was funny, by the way. Says, how many times I've heard that. So I decided that, the history of how that happened was a very amazing story. So I had to write it. So the book was originally called My Name is Ian Musk, because I thought that's when he first called me in 2001. I thought that's what his name was. He's got a different accent than us Americans. And so it was a little harder to understand him because I had the top down on the car. But I wrote that chapter. And then as I passed the manuscript out, people said, well, how did that happen? How did you get there? He didn't walk into a vacuum. And so I wrote all of that. And then people start to ask, well, what happened after? And so I wrote that part of the book. And then the finally people said, well, why were you even interested in space? Because they know me and know that, my fixation on the automotive side. And so I wrote that part. So I think it's an interesting book. People that have read it really like it. It's being made into a 4-part miniseries is where we're at right now with it. So been picked up by some notable names in Hollywood, and hopefully we'll get that done in the next few years.
Well, that's super exciting. And it sounds like some of the methods you're using with Phantom Space, with, you're making your own rockets, you're making certain things, but then also you're sourcing the best if you don't need to. It's really the smart sourcing. So I guess sometimes you break rules and sometimes you go with what is already done. Tell us, getting back to you, Charlie, something about this Lunar Olympics. What the heck is that? Were you guys out on space doing sports, playing golf, and I don't know, what was that?
If you think back about Apollo, the closeout of the lunar stay, I can think of three missions. Apollo 14, Alan Shepard took a golf club and several golf balls, and he's a great. We played golf together, and he's a great golfer and loves it. And so he was going to play golf on the moon, and so that was the first one I remember. And he's swinging one-handed in his spacesuit, and man, that was pretty good, I thought. And then David Scott on the next flight did a Newtonian experiment. He took a hammer and a feather and dropped them at the same time, and they both hit the ground at the same time because there's no atmosphere on the moon. Gravity's gravity, and so feathers fall at the same rate as the hammer. And so John and I were trying to think of something to celebrate our end of mission that would be unique. And so the thought occurred to us that, hey, the Olympics are in Munich this summer, and we were going to be off in April if things went right. And the Munich Olympics were in August, so we were going to kick off the Olympic year with the Moon Olympics. And we thought that, I think we can maybe do a broad jump and then a high jump and see how that was going to go. And so we were running behind schedule, and Mission Control was pushing us a little bit to get back inside. And John started bouncing. He said, well, we're going to do the Moon Olympics, Houston. And so I started to bounce. And down here with all of my gear on, I weighed 363 pounds. The backpack weighed as much as the life support system weighed as much as I did. And so that's changes your center of gravity. And so you have to walk bent over and to keep your balance up on the moon, or down here too with that kind of weight distribution. Anyway, I started bouncing. When I gave a jump, I straightened up. Well, that put the CG backwards, and over I went, and that big high jump deal. And the only time in the whole mission where I had fear. And the thought, I'm in trouble. But if fear is not a bad emotion if you don't panic. Mm-hmm. And so the thought occurred to me, roll right. And so as I was disappearing, the TV camera was on the front of the rover. I'm behind the rover. So they see me go up and go back and disappear behind the rover. And so about the time I disappear, I guess I'm rolling right and bounced. I broke my fall on my right hand and my right leg, bounced onto my back, and my heart was pounding, but I'm still alive. I said, golly. And I checked the pressure in the suit. It was okay. And the other pressures and things were good in the suit and the quantities. And so about that time, John Young trots over and looks down at me and gives me in a very stern voice, said, that wasn't very smart, Charlie. And I said, help me up, John. So he helped me up, and my heart was really pounding. And, I'm okay. I didn't kill myself. And then I looked up, and the TV camera was pointed right at me. And Mission Control, you could tell they were very, very upset. And so Capcom, I don't remember, I think it was Tony England. I was like, Capcom says, flight says no more Moon Olympics, guys, get back inside. So I think the last thing I did, I think I'd already put this picture of my family on the moon. And and so we were through that. We were actually closing out everything. And John had to go park the car, and I was carrying some rocks back inside, and that. So the Moon Olympics turned out to be almost a disaster, but it was a good deal. And later on, about 10 years or so ago, I guess it was, Apollo 16 got a special plaque from the, or not a statue, but a special, let's call it a plaque. It was
Maybe.
It was from the International Olympic Committee, presented to me. John he had passed on. Presented to me in Apollo, well, not presented to me, but it was to Apollo 16 for taking the spirit of the Olympics to the moon. So that's one of my trophies on display now.
So Michael,
and you think that we're crazy racing cars, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't hold a candle.
I learned something, very important lesson. It says never do anything in space you haven't practiced on Earth. And I had not practiced that on Earth, and so it almost was.
I want to make sure everyone gets that about the photo that you took and you brought of your family. And I think if you just share a little more, everyone on the, every astronaut that went to the moon was able to bring something. Can you share a little more for our audience can really capture that and how special that is?
Be happy to. Back during the Apollo, the families lived in Houston. We had a nice neighborhood, El Lago, near Space Center, but the training was always in Florida. The simulators were there, the spacecraft was there, and then we weren't doing that. We were out geology somewhere training, so we were going all the time. And my boys were. Charles was coming on 7, and Tom, the youngest, was about 4.5 at the time. And so I asked the boys, I said, "You guys want to go to the moon with Dad?" And they got really excited. "Yeah, we'd love to." And I said, "Well, I can't really take you in the spacecraft, but we can take a picture of the family, and I can take it and drop it on the moon. And so the family will be on the moon." Well, that's what I got permission to do that, to take the picture and Deke Slayton, not chief of the astronaut office, but director of flight crew operation. I said, "Deke, can I do this? Put it in my pocket of my spacesuit." He said, "Yeah, sure." And so it was, I got permission. And so one of the last things I did was to take this picture out of my pocket and drop it onto the moon. And I leaned over a little bit and just did a couple of clicks on my camera and took a picture of the picture. And on the back of the picture, we had written, "This is the family of astronaut Charlie Duke from planet Earth who landed on the moon in April 1972." And we all signed it. And so
is that the Lifetime? Weren't you on Lifetime magazine? Was that something that was on there too of you?
I'm not sure where the Life. I'm pretty sure Life magazine had that picture. It was. Okay. It's the only one. It's the only picture of a family that was left on the moon, and it didn't last very long. I might add, because the temperature on the surface of the moon at this point was like over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And so as I dropped this plastic picture, it began to shrivel up almost right away.
Wow.
And so it didn't last very long, but long enough for me to get a picture of the picture.
That's really cool. Well, yeah. I think I would love to get a little more of the importance. I feel like this is an intergenerational experience where we have someone who's a legend here today, Charlie Duke, and then Jim Cantrell, who was obviously, you must have been inspired, though you didn't know that you wanted to be a rocket scientist, however you're called. It seems like you're an entrepreneur, rocket scientist, but we have the two of you today. And then I feel like Phantom, though you're quiet, you're not loud out there on all billboards, but Phantom Space is really part of this new effort to not only realize space, to keep it going. I'd love to have this time to talk a little more about that vision together today.
Well, let me just tell you my story and why I got interested in space. You know, when I was 7 years old, I was watching this man next to me walk on the moon. You know, I watched Neil and Buzz also walk on the moon. And I'm reliving the memory hearing Charlie talk about the Olympics, right? I'm reliving that memory of watching it. And so I was, glued to the TV. I grew up on a ranch in California, rural California, and we just weren't exposed to science and things like that, but it fascinated me. And so I grew up with what I now call the promise of Apollo, which was we were going to go back, we were going to go to Mars, we we're going to do all these things, and that ignited something in me that still burns to this day. And so that inspiration is really what caused SpaceX to occur, believe it or not. If you follow the history, 1972, I remember when you guys were on the moon, the Capcom said, hey, they passed the shuttle program. And I remember John Young saying, oh, that's great. It's good. We're going to do something after Apollo. And so that was the promise of Apollo, which turned out to be not what we all thought it would be. And as time went on, we could see that the U.S. Space program, particularly when the Soviet Union faded, really had no reason to be. And here's this entire generation that, for better or for worse, had grown up, hoping that we would continue this great adventure and step into the shoes of these great men who did this before us. And so, to be blunt, we got pissed off. And a lot of us, just wanted to do something. We felt like our lives were going to waste working for NASA and some of these things where nothing was getting done. It was mired in bureaucracy. And so we just went out and did things ourselves, right? And thus the title of my book, Breaking All the Rules. We didn't ask forgiveness. We just went. I worked with the Soviets and the French because they were doing something, not because I loved the Soviets. I didn't. I'm anti-communist, hardcore, and an old Reagan voter. And, there were many other people like me. Chris Thompson's another one of them, who just said, we're going to go do this. And so what happened was, into that vacuum of what NASA was doing stepped Elon Musk. And he brought the talent and the money and the connections with the money to make things change. And I believe in my heart of hearts that SpaceX will be putting the next people on Mars. And I don't say men because it'll be men and women. And, it's been generations since that. I'm extremely proud to have had a small part in a very big thing. And I think it goes back to Charlie and his colleagues who were the brave pioneers in this business. And that's ultimately what we're about as a human species, is going over the next hill, finding what's over the next hill, exploring it, exploiting it. And it always follows economics. And that's, I guess, where I'm a lot different from some people. I look at the New World and it was exploited because of economics. And nobody 500 years ago, when Columbus was coming here in the early days, could imagine what it would turn into. Just nobody. And that's where we are with space. We have no clue what it's going to be, but it's going to be big. And it's the next big thing.
Well, geez, I don't know how to follow up with that, Jim.
Well, let me just say, I agree with what Jim is saying here. And as each generation comes along, you climb a mountain and you pull your kids and their grandkids along with you, and they get to the top of the mountain and they see the next mountain in the distance over there, and they get a challenge. That's my mountain, and I'm going to climb that mountain. And so if we can motivate the kids, our children and grandchildren, to have this vision that our generation helped Jim have in his generation, then it's all going to be worth it. And when I heard that NASA, this was years ago, when NASA was thinking about giving money to SpaceX and whoever it was that had these ideas, I said, man, we don't have any money anyway. Why are we giving it away? Well, and so I was sort of against it. But then I saw when they gave SpaceX and Blue Origin and several others a seed money to get it going, I changed my mind right away because they are really sharp, and space sort of came alive again for a lot of people. And not only could you ride into space, but they were taking satellites. They were rendezvousing with the space station. And I thought it just kick-started space again. And the interest in space is a lot stronger now than it was when NASA was just struggling along with with a space station, and and unfortunately, the only way we could get there was on a Russian spacecraft, which was really humiliating to me. But now SpaceX and and others are going, and now we got this exciting program that's going on, and people are looking out right now, not only unmanned but for manned, and it's going to kickstart, I think, Artemis, and because we're going to fly to the moon basically on SpaceX's rockets. Looks like to me.
So where are we with this space renaissance? If I know we had a slowing point. We got to the moon a long time ago. What would you say, Charlene, if this is a renaissance, if this is a chapter with our space travel pursuits?
Well, we were on the moon. Let me back up to 50 years ago. We were on the moon when Capcom said the Congress had just approved the space shuttle program. And John and I thought that was a great idea. And so it turned out, though, that NASA spent all the money, and Apollo was so successful, they canceled the last 3 Apollo missions and put the money in Space Shuttle. And from Space Shuttle, they put it into the space station. So it's the last 40 years or more, you've had no money for this return to the moon. But now, with Space Shuttle coming to an end, and private space is taking over or taking hold, space station is going to be no more after another 10 to 15 years. A return to the moon and with Artemis seems to be the way to go. And I see a focus now more on a deep space effort to the moon, and building a moon base, a permanently manned base on the moon. There's a lot of good scientific reasons to we can do that. And so we're developing that capability right now through Artemis. It's a NASA program, but we'll be flying on big rockets. One of them will be a SpaceX rocket, I think, and then space, what do they call it? Space Launch System, SLS, which is going to eventually be bigger than Apollo, and it's a huge rocket, and it's going to carry a lot of stuff up there. But Artemis is going to be a real challenge, I believe, Michael. You look at where they've picked the land on the South Pole, it's very rough, but with the new technologies we've got, I think they can pull it off down there. But in Apollo, we would never have tried a landing at the South Pole. We couldn't have done it. And so we picked spots along the equator where it was smoother than it's going to be down in the South Pole region. I'm excited about it. I think that we're getting off. Artemis is struggling now. It's first trip to the moon is another couple of years, but they're going to just orbit like Apollo 8 did. And then after that's the first landing attempt. They have the cruise pick, but the schedule is slipping a little bit.
Well, Jim, where do you fit in? Obviously, you're part of this new space renaissance, but tell us again a little more your fit in this. Obviously, you're not going to the moon, and you're in a different vertical. Could you share a little more about that?
Yeah, I will. I just want to say to Charlie's comments that to hear these words come from you is a closed loop for me. That we started something again that you guys were the pioneers on. We stand on your shoulders, so thank you. So where does Phantom fit in? So I look at the space as in Charlie's time was the sole domain of nation states because the financial and human capital was really only possessed by nations, and it was a contest in those days between communism and capitalism on the world stage. And this was something that all the world watched with great interest. And we beat the Soviets to the moon, and that was a great victory for capitalism. So we forgot in the 1970s and the 80s that capitalism is what built the moon mission. And capitalism, for all its faults, is the most imperfect but best system we have in creating value in humanity. So we're following that same line of thinking at Phantom, that while the human aspirational side of this is so important, there's also the capitalistic side behind it. So we recognize that the space business has changed from nation state focused to really private capital and entrepreneurs who can create products that the government doesn't know they need, right? I'll make the analogy of how the Defense Department in particular procures things with their 5-year plan, and they set the budgets and the products. I call it a Soviet economic system. I get in trouble for saying that, but really it's the same thing, and we get the same kind of results. So by bringing capitalism into it, we can anticipate, and many of us worked with the government, so we know what the government needs, and we do it very efficiently. So we take intelligent risks on developing these capabilities that the government simply can't. Given the instant media age we live in, and I remember when the space shuttle was late for a few hours, the media is bitching about it, and that sort of environment's toxic for the kinds of things that NASA's doing. So I'm happy to see NASA go back to its core mission, which is human exploration, understanding the planet and understanding the universe in which we live in, not building stuff. Right? NASA building things is not its proper mission. Right? It's not about jobs in Alabama. It's not about jobs in your district. It's about the human mission. So what Phantom's really trying to do is to do its part to provide the core infrastructure, if you will, for the capitalists to make money in space, because that will underpin everything else that we do on the human side. And there may be a business case for going to Mars. I can't think of it yet. But the same could have been said for Christopher Columbus coming to the New World. Spain benefited immensely from that small investment in Christopher Columbus. And that's really where our head's at, is we want to be the guys that make money in space, and we have to build infrastructure first.
Yeah, and I like what you said earlier, kind of the ecosystem. Phantom Space is kind of like the ecosystem, and that's with the rockets you're doing, the satellites, and then the technology, I guess, the capabilities to make that happen. Sort of like a plug and play. As much as I don't really understand it because I'm not in that space, but I think the analogy really helps for me to understand. I do understand there's a ton of satellites, a ton of telecom. I'm sure, for all I know, not only the defense, the government, Google, whatever telecom would like to be stitched across low orbital could be your customer. So,
Yep,
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, where do we go from here? I mean, we're not going to go to Mars today. We're kind of slowly winding down. I don't want to end too early, but I don't want to drag it out and when we're already land on the launch pad or come back. So help me here.
Charlie, you go ahead.
Well, I think we're laying the foundation now for an exciting decade of return to deep space. We'll start returning with Artemis. It's a program that has been around for a long time. That was started under George Bush, but then Obama canceled everything except the command module, which was Orion, and which looks like Apollo on steroids. But then it's been picked up again, and it's now SpaceX and Blue Origin are bidding on the lander. We've got companies building rovers, designs for rovers. And the motivation of returning to deep space and returning to the moon and establishing, I think, what's going to be a permanent base on the moon is NASA's objective. Phantom and other companies are focusing on near Earth orbital stuff, and because the demand for satellites and demand for payload, science payloads is overflowing, in my opinion, and everybody wants to get in space with this. And so Jim's got a niche for a rocket that will be cheaper than launching on a big SLS or whatever. Everything. You don't need that kind of rocket for everybody, but deep space you do. And so I think we found I'm just a small guy in this phantom space, but he has found a niche that I think is going to pay off for the investors and for science, not only.
Yeah.
So my response to that is really start with a historic context. So one of my ancestors was on the second resupply mission to Jamestown in 1609, and they came to this part of the world not knowing how to live here, knowing how they would ever make it, but with this sense of adventure. That's really where we're at today, right? We're past the early explorers who came here, pioneered their way. This is Charlie. We're now on the next generation who are settling the Jamestowns. We're settling, some of the New England communities, and this is underpinned in history by the commerce that happens. The trade, the furs, the lumber, all these things that go back and forth to Europe, and by the people who want to come to the New World and make their way. So if you look at that in that historical context, you ask yourself, what's the equivalent in space? So yes, near Earth orbit makes things better on Earth, and there's really two big applications there. There's telecommunications, which is expanding greatly. The other is imaging and weather data collection, so information about where we live. And so the first is really very mature, the telecommunications, but it's going through a revolution that most people may not realize. So Starlink is up, and there's almost 6,000 satellites up that SpaceX has launched. And the reason they could launch that many is they control launch, which is part of Phantom's business thesis, by the way. And so by having 6,000 satellites up there, they now can sell data at about 20 cents a gigabyte. Whereas if you look at terrestrial fiber, it's about 70 cents a gigabyte. If you look at legacy internet from space, it's about $3 a gigabyte. So now you've got something where the cost seems to be going down in space. Networks that link globally in space are coming down in cost. Networks that link globally and terrestrially are going up in cost because of crowding, regulatory, environmental concerns. Everything causes those costs to go up. So we're going to have a massive shift from terrestrial networking to space networking. It's going to be slow over time, but this is a fundamental shift. And the costs and the ability to reach global places will go up immensely. The second part of it, which is observation, is really not, there's too much data. There's not an ability to exploit the data. You think of it as photons in, camera images to decisions out. So decision quality information. AI is going to be the fundamentally transforming factor there, I think, because AI is fundamentally based on large data sets that you can get decision quality information out of. So beyond that, then when you start to look at what are the fruits of Artemis and these other activities, you start to think of extraterrestrial resources. So for example, on the moon, most people don't know this, but the surface, the regolith, as they call it, the dust, if you will, is full of what's known as helium-3, which you might think, well, what good is that? There's about 18 kilograms of it in the United States. It's a byproduct of weapons production, but it is a strategic resource. It's very controlled. It's useful for clean fusion energy. Okay, this is the only fuel that will really do clean fusion. Number two is quantum computing. This is the only substance we know of that can get that cold enough to make quantum computing happen. So there's an immediate need right there. There's a huge economic demand already if we can solve getting back and forth. Then you start talking about asteroids and rare minerals there and so forth. I mean, this sort of jumps to where Jeff Bezos is. And a lot of people scratch their head about what he's doing. But if you understand that he thinks Earth is the residential zone and space is the industrial zone, now you get it, right? And he writes $2 billion a year in his own money to underwrite the Blue Origin activity. That's where that's going. So he's thinking much more long term than anybody else in this business.
That's an excellent summary to me. And I look when Apollo was winding down, or not winding down, but was successful, the political change, the attitudes changed. Why are we spending so much money on the moon? We've got so much need down here on Earth. And my response is that we didn't spend a dime on the moon. It was all spent in the United States of America on products that have been exploding around the world. And people are making so much use of these products that were developed to get us to the moon and back. And so foresight, like Jim and the others are doing, to see the really value of what's going to come from all of this. And your summary was really terrific. Learned a lot.
Well,
So
I'm honored
anyway,
that you did.
Yeah. Anyway, it's we got a good argument. Let's stay in space, and it's going to be tremendous.
Yeah, it's part of our species. I mean, that's how we're wired. We're wired, and then the applications for humanity here are just, it's 1,000x, just like what you're saying. I mean, the energy, that could be our energy solution. I mean, just alone, who knows? So I really do. It's unfortunate that we hear people that, oh, we need to solve poverty, we need to solve homelessness. No, that this might actually solve all the energy use and whatever, all the different productions of medicine and food, whatnot. So anyway, you guys are awesome. I love what you're doing. I love to have the whole full cycle from you, Charlie Duke, and then Jim Cantrell bringing it forward. Any last moments, how people can find you, what we need to do before we send it off?
Well, I've got charlieduke.com, but also I think you can reach me through Phantom Space. And so there's a lot of, I'm available on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm easy to find too. Google my name, jimcantrell.com. I'm often on Twitter, and I'm not political, by the way, so you'll be disappointed if you are. Social media. So yeah, and you buy my book, Breaking All the Rules. It's on Amazon.
Awesome.